Have you ever wished you could just listen to the past? I mean, really listen. Not through a history book written hundreds of years later, and definitely not through some legend that's been twisted over time. But what if you could get the raw, unfiltered story straight from the people who were actually there? What if stones could talk? Well, you know what? They can. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to listen.
You see, the biggest headache for any historian is just noise. The noise of time, of different opinions, of fading memories. Most of the history we read was written long after the fact. And think about that for a second. A story told a century later is going to have a different spin, right? Different details get emphasized, maybe the whole point of the story changes. So how do we cut through all that noise and get to the real deal?
Well, we have to find history that was written by itself. And that, my friends, is where inscriptions come in. On one hand, you've got your typical history, written by others. It can be biased, it's written way later, and sometimes it just kind of drifts into becoming a myth. But then you have messages that were carved right into stone or metal by the people of that time. We're talking contemporary, direct, and completely unfiltered. It's the closest thing we have to a time machine. Now, there's a whole science dedicated to studying these amazing messages, and it's called epigraphy. And let me tell you, for historians, these epigraphs are pure gold. They are, without a doubt, the most important and reliable primary sources we have for piecing together what actually happened in the past. They're not just stories. They are hard evidence, locked in stone. They can prove what we thought was true, or, even more exciting, completely flip our understanding on its head. So, how in the world do we get these stones to talk? It's not as simple as just, reading them. It's this incredibly careful process, almost like historical detective work. It takes a ton of patience, a lot of skill, and even a bit of artistry. So let's pull back the curtain and see how an epigraphist brings these ancient voices back to life.
This whole complicated job really boils down to 3 key steps. First up is the stamping ink. An epigraphist will take a damp piece of paper, lay it over the inscription, and then gently tap it with a brush so the paper gets into every single little groove. Then, they dab black ink all over it. The ink only hits the raised surfaces, and what you're left with is a perfect, portable, black and white copy. Pretty cool, right? Next up is transliteration. This is where they take the ancient script, say something like Brahmi, and convert it character for character into a modern one we can actually read, like the Roman alphabet. And finally, the moment of truth, translation. This is where they figure out the meaning, line by painstaking line, and at last, the story is revealed.
And once we translate them, we find out pretty quickly that these inscriptions aren't all talking about the same thing. Not at all. They had all sorts of different purposes, which gives us this amazing, wide-angle view of what ancient life was actually like. They weren't just for kings and queens. They were public announcements, legal records, memorials, each one telling its own unique kind of story. And you really see a huge variety in what they were used for. For starters, you've got eulogies, or pashastis. These are basically official hype pieces listing all of a king's amazing achievements. Then you have edicts, which are more like official proclamations from a ruler. Think of it as a public service announcement for an entire empire. You've also got grants and charters, which are essentially ancient legal deeds, recording who donated what land or what goods to a temple or a community. And finally, you get these really personal memorials, honoring everyone from a hero who died in battle to a monk who reached enlightenment. Each one is like a little window into their world.
And this is where it gets really, really cool. Because beyond just what they are, these inscriptions tell some absolutely incredible stories. Stories that are sometimes so complex, so emotional, and so human that it feels like they could have been written yesterday. So let's dive into 2 amazing examples from ancient India that show just how powerful these voices from the stone can be. Okay, our first story comes from a temple wall in a small town called Uttaramerur, way down in southern India. It dates back to around 920 CE. Now, this carving isn't about a king's big victory or some grand donation. No, it records something way more revolutionary: the super detailed rules for electing local government officials. It is, for all intents and purposes, a constitution for a village assembly, carved right into the stone.
And just look at the level of detail here. To even get your name in the running for a spot on a village committee, you had to clear some seriously high hurdles. You had to own land and live in your own house, which basically ensured you had some skin in the game. There was a specific age bracket, 35 to 70, to get that perfect balance of energy and experience. You had to be educated, especially in religious texts. But it wasn't just about money or book smarts. You needed a reputation for good conduct and had to be good at business. And I love this part.
You couldn't serve on a committee if you'd already done so in the last 3 years. Talk about built-in term limits to prevent anyone from getting too powerful.
And they were absolutely dead serious about integrity. This is a direct quote from the inscription, and it's a straight-up anti-corruption clause. Anyone found guilty of theft was automatically out. The rules also kicked out anyone guilty of other major sins, anyone who took bribes, or anyone who'd committed forgery. They weren't just hoping for good leaders, they were systematically designing a process to weed out the bad ones from the very beginning.
So, after all that, how did they make the final choice? This is the best part. They used this brilliantly transparent and fair system called coup de volaille, or the pot ticket method. The names of every single eligible candidate were written on these little palm leaf tickets. All the tickets from all 30 wards of the village were put into one big pot. Then, in front of the entire village, a young boy, chosen specifically because he was too young to have any bias, would reach in and pull out tickets, one by one, and whoever's name was drawn, that's who was appointed. An incredible mix of strict qualifications and random lottery. Just astounding for its time.
All right, let's go from the rules of a single village all the way up to the heart and mind of an emperor. Our second story comes from the famous rock edicts of Emperor Ashoka, who ruled a massive empire back in the 3rd century BCE. We're looking at Edict number 13, which is one of the most remarkable and personal confessions ever recorded by a world leader. It's the story of a brutal war and the crushing regret that came after. This number is at the very heart of the story, 100,000. According to Ashoka's own words, carved in stone, that's how many people were killed during his invasion of the kingdom of Kalinga. And he notes that many, many more were captured, and even more died later from starvation and disease. That staggering human cost is what this is all about. It clearly haunted him.
This is Ashoka in his own words for everyone to see forever. Divanampriya, which means beloved of the gods, was his official title. And here is the beloved of the gods publicly admitting his profound sorrow and remorse over the violence he caused. Just take a second to think about that. Can you imagine a world leader today issuing such a direct, personal, and public admission of guilt for the casualties of a war they started? It's an incredibly powerful and human moment, saved for us for over 2,000 years. But this wasn't just him saying, "My bad." Ashoka's regret led to a complete 180-degree turn in his entire government policy. The inscription goes on to say that after the Kalinga War, he gave up military conquest. Period. Instead, he dedicated the rest of his rule and all the power of his empire to a totally new kind of victory, Dhamma Vijaya, or conquest by morality. From now on, he would spread his influence not with an army, but with principles of nonviolence, tolerance, and just being a good person. This chart really shows you that change in black and white. Before the Kalinga War, Ashoka's main focus was military expansion. But after, just like his own edict says, there's this dramatic pivot. Military conquest basically drops to zero, and this idea of moral conquest becomes the main goal of his empire. He sent out messengers of peace instead of armies, he had wells dug, trees planted, and even set up hospitals for both people and animals. This one inscription captures one of the most profound political transformations in all of history.
So, from a village's democratic election to an emperor's complete change of heart, these stories are just incredible, right? But they also point to a bigger truth about why these ancient carvings are so unbelievably important for us today. What's their real, lasting legacy?
Well, when you boil it all down, you see why this stuff is priceless. They are unfiltered, primary sources. They let us hear the past without centuries of other people's opinions layered on top. They often correct the record or add crucial details to stories that were written down much, much later. They show us the nuts and bolts of ancient societies, their laws, their beliefs, their daily lives. And maybe the coolest part, they are a direct, physical link to our ancestors. When you stand in front of one of these, you are reading the very words that they carved.
You know, in our digital age, where data is so fragile and can vanish in a blink, that's a really powerful idea. These inscriptions are not just old rocks with some writing on them. They are history's original, unbreakable hard drive. They are a data storage system so tough, so permanent, that their messages have survived the collapse of empires, natural disasters, and the steady march of thousands of years just to speak to us today. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. Today, we carve our histories not into stone, but onto servers, into the digital cloud. So 1,000 years from now, if somebody can decode our digital world, what will our inscriptions say about us? What values, what laws, what moments of regret or brilliant ideas will they find? What's the story that we're leaving behind?